Welcome to the Winter 2021 English Reading Series. This is our 21st year of the series. We are thrilled to have poet Claire Wahmanholm with us today, and thank you all for joining us via Zoom. The English Reading Series is sponsored by the Department of English and the College of Humanities, with help from Rebecca Kazanavi, Robert Means, and our friends at the library. We'll start today with a prayer by Melissa Fales, and following that prayer, Chelsea Ames will offer an introduction. As a reminder, we will drop a purchase link to Claire's book Wilder in the chat window, so be on the lookout for that. Also, please remember to join us next week for a reading by Emily Ruskovich. Melissa, when you're ready.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful that we could be gathered here today virtually and that we have the opportunity to hear her speak and share her works with us. And please help us as we go into the rest of our weekend to keep thee with us and to try to go about and make the world a better place. And in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Claire Wahmanholm received her BA from UW-Madison, her MFA from the Writing Seminars at Johns Hopkins University, and her PhD from the University of Utah. Her debut full-length collection, Wilder, won the 2018 Lindquist and Venom Prize for Poetry, the Society of Midland Authors Award for Poetry, and was a finalist for the 2019 Minnesota Book Award. Her second collection, Redmouth, was published with Tinderbox Editions in 2019. Claire is also a 2020 McKnight Writing Fellow. Rick Barrett, who was our English Reading Series guest a month ago, speaking about Wilder, wrote, "Long after I finished reading Wilder, I was in grief that its beauty had ended, and also in grief over the spoiled world it describes. Stripped wholly of autobiographical content, the poems in this book seem like the texts written by an ancient collective, texts that are at once full of wonder and bewilderment, cosmic vision and earthly pain. As one reviewer described her, I also see Claire as an alchemist of language. Claire's writing feels both fresh and searing. She lives and teaches in Minnesota's Twin Cities. And with that, I am pleased to introduce to all of you, Claire Wahmanholm."
Hello. Someone let me know if the sound isn't working. Well, don't let me know because I can't see the chat. Let's assume the sound is working. Yes, thank you, Spencer. And thank you, Chelsea, for that wonderful introduction, and for Spencer and Rebecca for running the show here. I'm really grateful to be right here in the kind of the most flexible sense of the word with y'all today. And also grateful to Michael Labers, who I hope I am embarrassing by saying that he's been really central as an intelligent, generous, graceful, and insightful reader of my work. And he helped me put together both Redmouth and Meltwater, which I'll be drawing most of my poems from today. But neither of those books would have happened without his eyes, so I'm super grateful for that and for him extending the invitation for me to read with y'all today. So I'll do 30 minutes of reading and then do my very best to field any questions y'all might have. Out of complete transparency, let me tell you that I'm terrible at fielding questions on the fly. I get panicked and say things I don't necessarily believe. So if you want me to lie to you, ask me a tricky question in about half an hour. Another disclaimer, if you see me like leaning way into you and blinking and squinting, it's because I got LASIK exactly 2 weeks ago and it is kind of a mess. I'm like super nearsighted still. Probably it's people whose eyes are as bad as mine were not meant to get LASIK. We were just meant to wander off cliffs and just not be a problem. I promise I'm gonna read poems in a second here, but we've been rewatching 30 Rock at our house recently, and we just saw the episode where Jack makes Liz get that off-brand LASIK so she can do the Deal Breakers talk show, and they get in an argument and she starts crying, but they messed up her tear ducts, so the tears just start dribbling out of her mouth, right? That might be me. Just kidding. I don't produce tears anymore because of the LASIK. Okay. I love that we started with a prayer. The first poem that I'll read is also sort of in invocation. It's called O. for reasons that will be obvious in a minute. And it is the opening poem from Meltwater. Oh. Once there was an opening, an operation, out of which oared the ocean, then oyster and oyster catcher, opal and opal-crowned tanager. From ornateness came the ornate flycatcher and ornate fruit dove. From oil, the oil bird. O is for opus, the Orphean warbler's octaves, the oratorio of orioles. O for the osprey's ostentation, the owl and its collection of ossicles. In October's ochre, the orchard is overgrown with orange and olive, oleander and oxlip, ovals of dew on the oatgrass. O for obsidian, onyx, or for boreholes like inverted obelisks. O for the onion's concentric O's observable only when cut, for the opium oozing from the poppy's globe only when scored. O for our organs, for the os of the cervix, the double O's of the ovaries plotted on the body's plane to mark the origin. O is the orbit that cradles the eye. The oculus opens an O to the sky where the starry outlines of men float like bubbles between us and oblivion. Once there were oarfish, opalized, olive flounders. Once the oxbows were not overrun with nitrogen. O for the mussels opening in the ocean's oven. O for the rising ozone, the dropping oxygen, for algae overblooming like an omen or an oracle. O earth, outgunned and outmanned. O who holds the void inside itself. O who has made orphans of our hands. So that one is part of a series of alphabet poems that I've got running through Wilder and also through Meltwater now, and which I hope will continue in future books. I work on them when I can. I've only managed, I think there are like 4 in Wilder and maybe 3 coming up in Meltwater. I don't go in order, I just kind of pick a letter that appeals to me and go with it. I've been working on, earlier this winter, I was working on P, but I've gotten stuck because it turns out that P is a hilarious sound. And so I was like, the poem is not hilarious. Like, I don't do humor, I'm not funny on the page. So I like got pretty far in this poem and I was like, I'm gonna read it out loud to make sure it sounds good. Readers, it did not. It's it just sounds hilarious. Vowels are good, O is good. There's this like flexibility of vowels with their sounds. Not the case with P, not a lot you can do there. So I'm trying to find ways around that and stay tuned. It might happen. But I'll do another one from Wilder. Wilder has B, D, G, and W in it. So I will do G. G is for girl, for gosling, silly goose. See her gambol, guileless from her gabled house. G is for gamble and gambit and game, for the way the girl's galoshes are gilded with grime before she even reaches the gate. G could be any girl, but say it is Gretel. See Gretel glow like a goldfinch in the gloom. See Gretel out in the green gale, gathering grauple the size of grapes in her gorse-torn gabardine. G is for the glade gobbling her up, for going, gone. If G is for the galloping gelding, it is also for the glue. G is for gag, for Gretel gnawing through the grove's gristle until it gapes and lets her go. G is for Gordian knots of golden hair, for the gap-toothed grimace. See Gretel's gown glazed with glycerin, the gingerbread packed like grout beneath her nails. G is for grit and gritted teeth, for eyes glinting like gallium, for gravid with grief. G is for Jean, for Gretel begetting a generation of girls who grow downward into the ground. G is the groundwater and the guts, the grown growing inside of us. I'll do another alphabet poem at the very end, but in the meantime, I'll do a couple poems from this kind of post-apocalyptic prose poem sequence that takes up about the last third of Wilder. I think there are like 20 of these poems maybe, and it's a narrative sequence. They tell the story of kind of an unspecified disaster, an unspecified trauma, maybe an ecological one or a political one or a humanitarian one that arrives and afflicts a community, and they have to kind of figure out how to respond to it. So I'll just do the first one and then one that's toward the end of the sequence. The first one is called Beginning, obviously, and it's an abecedarian, but by sentence rather than line, because it's a prose poem and the line is sadly immaterial. So each new sentence will start with the next letter of the alphabet instead of each new line. Beginning. A pulling began from nowhere. Book bindings came unglued, hairline cracks cobwebbed the backs of our hands. Caught in this force we could not call by name, we waited. Down by the river, no more boats. Even the docks had been uprooted and stacked on the shore. For a long time, we tried not to move, tried to feel in the air where the pulling's coming from. Groups of us stood with our index fingers licked and raised. How long did we stand before we put our hands to our chests? Irregular thumps, just there, just here. Kaleidoscope of wrong rhythms. Looking at the night sky, we could see new patches of darkness coming alive. Mornings were suddenly birdless, cloudless, without wind, bright deserts. Now we began to wonder whether we had done wrong things, or rather, which of our wrong things had been wrong enough. Putting our hands out in the dark of our basements, we felt gaps in the limestone where there had been none. Quarries filled overnight with unidentifiable slurry. Rotten fish slapped their rotten smell on the riverbank. Something was going to happen, had already begun happening, and no one wanted to be there when it finished. There was one way out of the city. Under the streets, a set of sewers led to the sea. Very carefully, we lowered ourselves into their metal mouths, leaving all the lights on in our houses. Whatever was watching us might be fooled. Xenon lamps shone like sun from the sewer walls, burning our skin. Yarn unspooled behind us as we walked deeper and deeper in. Zero, as in ground, as in vanishing point, as in where the reckoning begins. The last animals. We saw them from the top of the hill. The wind blew past our ears and down into the valley where they straggled up to their tails in snow. One spotted, one striped, one the color of dead leaves. Our encyclopedia had told us about animals, but none of us had ever seen a real one. To see the last of something wasn't new. We had seen many last things, the last acorn, the last lightning storm, the last tide. All the last things had the same smell, a solvent we could taste on the air, which is how we always knew to pay attention. The animals were moving steadily across the valley. We passed around the encyclopedia and studied the pictures, but none of them matched. Someone broke a stick from the last tree and tried to scratch the animals' outlines into the frozen dirt of the last vegetable patch, but it wouldn't take. The animals were crossing the valley faster than we could follow. Our nails broke as we raked at the soil. When we next looked up, our eyes filled with snow. What happens between those two poems? Nothing good. Let me tell you, it's grim. So that was just a little taste from Wilder. I'll do a set from Redmouth now, which I believe like some of y'all in the audience like may have read for class this semester. That's very exciting. I'm super grateful. This book looks like that, softer than Wilder in some ways. It's kind of in the grief register rather than the anxiety / terror / trauma register. And it's broadly writ, let me see if I can do this in a sentence, about how grief builds worlds and landscapes around us, and then how those worlds fall apart, or how we fall apart within those worlds as grief goes on, is maybe a very brief blurb on what Redmouth is doing. And I'll start with a poem called Breach. There's actually a poem called Breach in Wilder as well. Both books are interested in moments of rupture and disintegration and kind of bodily transformation. And Ovid's Metamorphoses is, maybe unsurprisingly, one of the touchstone texts of Redmouth. And Breach does start with an epigraph from Ovid, from early on in the Metamorphoses, when he's describing the aftermath of this like epic flood that has covered, the world as everyone knows it. Breach, and the epigraph goes, sometimes an anchor snags in a green meadow, sometimes a curving keel may graze the vines. Sometimes you wake to find your pasture changed. Sometimes you wake a free creature and shake your horse limbs. Sometimes your future seems a heavy thing to float in. You are a flight animal, but some mornings you limp. Some mornings teem with fish you cannot digest with your horse belly. You have keen horse eyes, but underwater, the colors are dim and the depths are full of teeth you cannot outswim. One morning, you wake to a punctured lung and several broken ribs. This is no longer your orchard, sigh your lungs. This is no longer your nest of grass. An anchor snags on your broken chest, a keel carves your back. You wish you were made for this, that you could wake to find your posture changed, that your body could thin and blend with the waterline. You dream until the pounding of your hooves breaks the night's ground into another morning where you have not yet drowned. You know these mornings are running out. Each sun rises more dimly, sprouts less freely from the water, wavers for just an hour over the waves before surrendering. You are soon to be uncreatured, unsutured from your pasture blade by blade. Why aren't you running? Why aren't you afraid? And as I mentioned earlier, this is a really landscape or kind of place-heavy book. So I thought maybe we just take a tour of some of the geography in the book. There are a lot of fields, pastures, valleys, forests, an ocean or two. So let's do the valley. The mountains have unraveled into sand. In small enough pieces, everything returns to its first softness, a silk, a wind. The mouse is soft in the snake's mouth. The snake is soft as a ripple through the pond, which used to rest in the mouth of the mountain. My stomach is red knots in a red curtain. Softly as a grain rolling in an anthill, one knot is starting to untie itself. In the mirror, I watch my mouth redden at the margins like a poisoned pond. A condor's wings cast smoke over its waters. The forest shivers spores from its leaves. Sometimes a shadow clots my lungs, breaking my breaths into smaller and smaller ones. I do not feel my red stomach, my red mouth, the smoke, the spores, the shadows. The softness of it all is awful, like watching an earthquake on mute, as if the sound of it could catch on the air and steady the earth. The soles of my feet are clouds that rain me numbly into the long grass until the valley is a bowl of sunset-colored water, deepening and deepening. That poem is also about my fear of internal bleeding. I don't care for it. I don't like the idea of being wounded and not being able to see or feel it. I like things to be tangible. Like I would like evidence of my own rupturing if it happens. Let's do a forest now. This one's called the Lavender Forest. As much dart as dark, quickness as quiet. Nests of bird bonelets, nests of crushed zeros some snake has sucked dry. The same way the air has sucked the blood from the leaves and bark of the forest. Dust. Everything is so dry it burns my eyes to look. The brook has vaporized. Its soft mud bed is soft powder. Behind the trees, each inch of sky is tender, lilac lit. Each finger of clouds is a matchstick struck. The animals paw at the hot velvet of their ears. In the lavender forest, I learned to touch my own face very lightly, like ash on a skin of snow, like a snowflake on the skin of a freezing lake. At night, I dream of water. I dream I am a frog in a human coat. Someday I will molt from my name and eat it, crushing that sorrow gently in my jaws. Did you know, 1, that frogs molt, and B, that they eat their molted skin? Waste not. That stuff's got nutrients in it, apparently. I think fields are by far the most common landscape in Redmouth. I like the connotations of like horizon and distance, of fertility or possibility, of the way that the field kind of intersects with the idea of the matrix in mathematics, which also forms a lot of the background of Redmouth. So here's one about a field. It's called fallow. Follow the field into its summer, into its fawn-colored heat, its tall, feathery yarrow. Look down at the untilled clouds breathing in the pond, whose water is so shallow and shadowless, it's hot. Harrows withdraw to the horizon, dragging wide, weeded furrows for you to lay your body in. What a bad year it's been. What a slow wallow of a season. Lay it down. Lay it down and wait for the cross clouds hatch and scatter. Remember the fish pond and its clouds, its stalks of swamp rose mallow, the wide-leafed sallows. Remember the hollow smell of waiting. Soon haying, but not until your teeth are tilled or tilth, not until the rhizomes of your bones have been pulled and killed. Lie low and let the swallows pick you clean. When the future arrives, it will rise willow green from your yellow eyes. So that's a little tour of kind of some of the natural world as it appears in Redmouth. I'll switch gears a little bit here. I'm sure we all have, but have you ever had those moments where like you just want to feel sorry for yourself? Like there's no reason to, but you just want to wallow, right? Literally no reason for me to feel blighted or cursed. But this poem that I'm about to read did sort of come out of that feeling. And in general, the speaker of Redmouth does seem to sort of be like a magnet for disaster or bad luck. And I think a lot about Freud's text, Mourning and Melancholia, which is such a fascinating text, and I love it. And he distinguishes between mourning and melancholia, where like mourning is kind of the healthy, normal one, and melancholia is the neurotic one. And he says, in grief or mourning, the world becomes poor and empty, and melancholia, it is the ego itself. So it's sort of the self turning on itself there, the brain of the melancholic. Anyway, this one is called My Life as a Nightjar. Nightjars, maybe you already know, but if you don't, they're nocturnal, ground-dwelling birds, sometimes also known as goat suckers. They are not terribly graceful, not terribly elegant, very plain, unremarkable. And I was like, yes, that's good. This feels right. This is My Life as a Nightjar. Dear Nightjar, dear hunkered down hunger, teach me, born unswan, born a squat goat sucker, crypticity. The art of lying low-hearted, splay-bodied, hidden in bracken. Sing your chirr into the heath of my ear. Into my moth mouth, feed me dusk. Your shadowless flight, the crepuscular signature of your feather, is one I am suited for. As everything tumbles softly into smaller and smaller things, your whippoorwill torpor is indivisible. My heart is already tumbling into rock, into acorn, a thorn. I am already born. I am already nearly not here. So I'll finish the Redmouth poems that I'm reading with some erasures. I love erasures. I do a lot of them. I have a sequence of erasures of Carl Sagan's Cosmos in Wilder. I have a sequence of erasures about glacial melt in Meltwater. And Redmouth has several erasures drawn from two classical sources, Virgil's Eclogue 8 and Theocritus's Idyll 1, both of which I love dearly and which are full of this like really lush, tangible, amazing language, thanks to Robert Wells and David Ferry's translations at least. And when I do erasures, I don't do them to critique or undermine or confront a source text. Erasure has been used like really compellingly for those things, but that's not my my jam. I prefer to think of my interactions with source text as like close readings more than anything else, sort of like highlighting the possibilities and parallel storylines that exist inside of one text, really highlighting its richness. I was reading an interview up at Eco-Theo Review, which if you don't know that journal, it's amazing. It's really good. And they were interviewing Rachel Jameson Webster, who has a book of erasures called The Sea Came Up and Drowned that I think was released last year. And the interviewer compared erasure to midrash or exegesis, depending on kind of your tradition. And I was like, oh my God, yes, yes. Why didn't I think of that connection? So brilliant. And describes really accurately the way I approach kind of erasure as this like reverent, spiritual, tender, inquisitive practice. And that's like a long intro for poems that are not very long. But I'll read all three of the Theocritus erasures, the ones from Idyll 1. They are not titled, they'll just sort of flow into each other, but I'll pause so you know ideally where they end. Grief is not a great river, nor is it a mountain. It is a bitter song, empty, heavy. You lie overthrown, a thorn in your ear. The long hills drag me into darkness. The song struggled to its end. Unhappy child, goodbye. Your touch is a sweetness. Only the unmilked song is sweeter, the water noise tumbling from the rocky spout. No tamarisks grow here, none. You have made yourself a glade, a gush of golden leaves, a yellow bloom. Hollow-eyed, the fish strains at the net. In the white distance, the sea is a darkening shadow the eye will not let alone. Asphodel, acanthus, I put away that elegy. You and forgetfulness are the same. Now drink the song. Stop your mouth with sweetness, honeycomb, and cicada. Here is the well, gently down. So that's Redmouth. I'm going to end with a couple new things that'll be forthcoming in my next book, which is called Meltwater. I've said it before, Meltwater. It's coming out 2023, which is forever for now. But and Meltwater is more explicitly about children and the ways that having children changes you and the world you live in, and makes it unrecognizable or alien in any number of ways, sometimes in very scary ways. And coincidentally, I just got my contributor copy for the new issue of Image in the mail yesterday. It looks like this. It's very pretty. And my poem, The New Fear, is in it. So I will read. I'll read that one, and then sort of a partner poem called The New Horticulture. But this is The New Fear. To say it was like air would be boring, and it was. There was nothing new about it except that it was new. It accumulated in our homes like souvenir shot glasses or promotional magnets. Nothing we noticed until we couldn't close our cabinets, couldn't find a clean surface to put our anxiety down on. It pooled in our urine and our sewers. It ballooned beneath the skin of rats. New holes gaped in the ozone layer. Above schools, churches, movie theaters, new mouths widened and widened until they disappeared. But unless they expanded faster than all our other hole-shaped failures, the holes in the redwoods, the holes in the ice, the holes in the elephant's flanks, who cared? If our pupils were dilated, it was because it was always dark. If our hearts were beating faster, it was because we were always running. Our blood sugar was so high that our wounds had stopped healing. The fear was structural as muscle. Like apples grown inside plastic molds to resemble hearts or stars, babies were cut out of us wearing fantastic shapes, grenades, mandrakes, a stretch of cactuses. They were born stork-bitten in every soft place, scarlet and hurt-looking. We kept them in their rooms, blinds down, in the half-lights all their lives. They grew to the size of their cribs, no more. And in that light, that wasn't really light, with our children who weren't really children, we saw that fear was the organ and the tissue and the cell, the membrane and the organelle. We saw no separation between the body and the bullet, no line between the lung and the water that fills it. The white letters of dread were invisible against their surface of snow. There were no words for what could scare us now. And this one is The New Horticulture, and it starts with an epigraph from Inger Christensen's Alphabet that goes, "In our despair, we have made a flowerless earth. There used to be bees. There used to be a name for those who tended them, a word for the fear of them, a set of instructions for how to smoke them out from beneath our eaves. Now, no flowers, no bees. Now we have 1,000 words for the word green. We have filed our eyes to more sharply read the dictionaries of the field, the shallow sea, the fleets of insectivorous birds who burn our eyes with the breeze of their chlorine-scented wings. Now, there are more and more carnivores. All night we hear monkeys eating each other loudly in the fruitless trees. There is sad green, and there is scared green, and a green for dread, and one for when we can't get out of bed in the afternoon. We used to feel nostalgic at the smell of cut grass, but now the sweet half is gone. Now we feel lonely and panicked as sirens when we pass a fresh lawn. Something is being rewound. The wind makes a wobbling sound as it spirals through the glades of cycads. Some people still make silk flowers, soft and flawless, expensively odorless. The rest of us bring pots of waterworts and mosses to the funerals, clasp savage bunches of horsetails. We grow unruly beneath the shadows of 4-story ferns. Monkey fur clogs our gutters. Monkey blood sometimes mists through our screens to speckle our botany books, propped open so we can imagine the smell of jasmine, lilac. Somewhere a clock is ticking. Blame spreads like a bog, acidic and endless. Someone has deleted 100 million years of flowers, has cut the brakes. Someone has pulled the pins out of all the grenades, the only kind of fruit we can still name. This new book is fun, back in the anxiety/terror register. But you made it this far with me, and I will reward you with one of my most uplifting poems. It's called In Sorrow Thou Shalt Bring Forth Children, but I promise it is not as grim as it sounds. The title is misleading. Though, if you think a lot of my poems are grim, you're right. And if you think I'm overall kind of pessimistic about stuff in general, you're also right. But what a lot of Meltwater is trying to do is reconcile like the impulse I had to bring not just one, but 2 children into the world, knowing everything I know and like feeling everything I feel. And like once you make that choice, you're or I'm like signing your life up to be permanently poignant in a way. I mean, like, and like what that does to you. And if my like children should ask ever, like how I would justify this choice to them. So that's what this poem is sort of doing. And it is an address to my children. It's a sestina, but each of the 6 stanzas is its own section. And this might not be for everyone. I like to know what the end words are so I can kind of listen for them. Otherwise, if I don't know what they are ahead of time, I keep listening and then I don't really hear the poem. So I'll help you out. It's knock, blue, violet, reach, hand, and desire. But as a bonus, the word sorrow also appears in each section. So again, the title is In Sorrow Thou Shalt Bring Forth Children. And it has an epigraph from Alicia Jo Rabin's Babies in the Apocalypse, which goes, but still we called you forth. 1. It was like this. An unearthly wind overtook me, knocked down a stand of trees, broke open a bright blue space in the woods of myself. Or call the wideness violet, something warm and future, a color more like the inner reaches of the body. I woke from myself, cupped within sorrow's hands. In that blood light, I was a sudden nebula of desire. 2. From inside its fog, I tried to describe this new desire as a taste, seawater, as a sound, a woodpecker's knocking. As if anything could live there, I put my hand to my chest and melted a sorrow-sized patch in its blue. Who would walk on this beach with its waves always reaching to be ice? When I pulled my hand away, it held a bunch of violets. 3. I welled, swelled. I was full of hyacinths, full of African violets, full of peach blossom and peony. Sorrow and desire mixed at my roots. I was a black dirt rainforest, reaching through my own mist for passion flowers, knocking stalks of sugarcane against my shins until they were blue. Bees could have made honey just by landing on my hands. 4. The beehive cluster, the honeycomb nebula, deep space is a hand full of sweetness and sting. The light of the newest stars is ultraviolet, invisible, hot as your fingers on my palm. In astronomy, a blue shifted body is one born toward the observer. Like desire, but volitionless, less human. I thought your arrival would knock all the sorrow from me, instead of increasing its reach. 5. I have eaten blueberries beyond blue. I have reached thirsty into thicket after thicket, scooping saltwater handfuls to my mouth. Miraculous, sorrowful fruit. The world knocks, but I am locking all the doors. I am devouring the sugared violet, the blackberry fool. I am trying to forget their richness, my desire of fruit I will someday need to turn away from, my mouth still blue. 6. This would be sorrow, to say no. It is autumn. There are still bluebirds, but few. The dew point is high, but falling. Soon we will reach the last warm day. I am teaching you something about desire without meaning to. I have you listen for the woodpecker, the hands of the clock ticking past fullness. I point to the sky that is violet, then less violet, then black. In the darkness, the knocking of my heart is bright blue, a color I cannot uncouple from desire. Here you knock. Here your sunlit hand reaches, points at my flowering sorrow. Look, you say, a violet. Thank you so much for your attention, your presumed attention. I can't see you. I don't know what's happening on the other side of the screen. But thank you, if not for being here with me, certainly for being, I know I sounded like I was done. I have one more poem. I know, it's misleading. I'll end with what is currently the final poem in Meltwater. It's called XYZ, another alphabet poem. I told you there would be one. There aren't quite enough X or Z words to make a whole poem out of. So these last 3 letters of the alphabet, I decided just to share a poem. And also I decided that in this case, the X's, Y's, and Z's can appear in the middles of words and the ends as well as beginnings. And about halfway through it, the poem does go into Middle English for a line or two. So if you're like, was that English? The answer is kind of. And the poem is an address to my younger daughter. I think I wrote it when she was 1, maybe. XYZ. The year yellows. The yolk of yesterday's sun lazes in the yard, piled beside the yew and yarrow, the zucchini vine that never flowered, the waxy zenobia. It sprawls like yarn, a yawn that won't be swallowed back into summer's mouth. I am zombie-eyed, zephyr-minded, would sleep until the next equinox if I could, would relax my heart until it stopped. The cold rises through the thorax and into the larynx. The autumn haze is heavy and thick as a smashed yam. Through it, pollen floats like yeast. It is hard to follow the wren's pitch and yaw, its yammering. Yearling, heir of my ex, you are full of the reflex to live. I am hexed, cannot be coaxed to thrive. Zygote means yolk, the zipping of 2 bodies together, the axes on which are plotted a galaxy of X's and Y's. Somewhere in that matrix is your syntax of chromosomes. You are a black box, a maze of invisible zigzags beyond exegesis. The toadflax freezes from radix to apex. The ilex is evergreen but untouchable, the fuzz of some animal transfixed in its thorns. I think about extinction, the unidirectional vortex of time, read all the obsolete entries in the dictionary, the Codex Urit and Lampa Black, the Yale Ecorin by flocks up to its helixed horns, whelps who drank, the mouse engrassed by the foxy laid, the phoenix from its sooty nest deborn ad infinitum. I don't care for eternity, its violence boxed and distributed into months. I don't care for the zodiac twisting back on itself like a zero. It only reminds me that your star is not fixed, that no stars are, that all measurements, azimuth to zenith, measure only emptiness. Even the Sphinx knew that time is the most vexing puzzle. I envy the zebra distributing its name endlessly among the zebra fish, the zebra mussel, the zebra finch. Back in the garden, the drizzle glazes into ice. A bronzed apple thuds a broken yo-yo. I cannot say no. I allow myself to be yanked back up, exhausted, seized by the topaz sky and the breeze through it. By yes, by you. Thank you. Now I'm actually done. I'm done for real. I will not be taking questions at this time. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. That was fantastic. I say this every week, but and such is Zoom, but I wish you could hear the applause of the 100+ people in attendance right now.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to our first question is from Lori. She said, "Welcome, Claire. I have so enjoyed reading your poetry, and it is some of the most stunningly beautiful. Some of the most stunningly beautiful and thoughtful I've experienced. Could you describe how the milestones in your life, for example, your bachelor's degree, MFA, PhD, and having children, have changed your focus or direction in your writing?"
Yes, that is a great question. I would say, I mean, the milestones that have been the most important have been the most recent ones. The births of my children. The oldest one is 4 now. The youngest one is about to be 2 next month. And those have been like the most profound kind of like earthquake moments in my life that gave, I think, my poems much more, or to me, more urgency or maybe stakes. I think before I had children, I was writing poems a little bit more distantly, like when the eye appears, this is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a thing. When the eye appears in my other in Wilder or in Redmouth, it's not necessarily the eye, like the personal eye, but in Meltwater and with the new work especially, the eye is like 100% the eye, and it felt more important or useful to put myself more into the poetry in a way, and that radically like did reorient like how I approached poetry and like what it's for and what it can do. I think those are the major ones. Yeah.
Excellent. Christy said, do you consider yourself an eco-poet? And what is the role of the writer/poet in an endangered world?
That's a big question. I think I don't know that I've called myself an eco. I think I would. More people have called me that than I've like identified myself that way. But I think it's apt. And mostly how I approach the natural world is through the lens of loss. Like I love so much in the world, and thinking about the things that will not be part of the world if we keep going the way we're going, motivates a lot of my stuff, especially like now that children are in the picture, and I'm like, oh great, what's this world that like I brought these children into? They're like, where are all the zebras, where are all the, they're gone, we killed them all. So I wish I could say that my orientation was like, here is how we can I can galvanize people into like change, but I think mostly what it's like, here is how I can make you sad about what we're going to lose. And maybe for some people that's galvanizing instead of immobilizing. That would be ideal, right? And I'd like to think that the point of the poet is the opposite of, we shouldn't be immobilizing, right? Like we should be galvanizing people. And if my poems do that, so much the better. But I don't make that my intention necessarily. I have a lot of sad feelings about the earth, and that's kind of what winds up in the poems.
Thank you. Drew said, what moves you towards the apocalyptic and devastated scenes in Wilder?
That's another good question. I think it was a way to make, so Wilder is written during, I'm trying to think of the years now, like 2012, 13, 14. So like pre-Trump, but still like very much in this era of police brutality and climate catastrophe, and all sorts of horrible things that were happening. And I was like drenched in anxiety during those years. And I saw the kind of the landscapes as a way of making my like mental landscape concrete. And I was like, here's what my brain feels like. It feels like this. And seeing that on the page kind of like reflected back at me, felt, even though it's like terrible and grim and gruesome, felt very validating. Like someone else is seeing my anxiety. Oh, it's me. But that still counted for me. So it's all about making the internal external, if that answers your question.
Marissa said, I love reading your work. It incorporates both real and sometimes fantastical themes, which is very interesting to read. What role do you believe realism plays in our lives, and what role does fantasy?
Ooh, that's another tricky one. I love that question, and I feel like if I were to answer it, I would lie to you. Like, I feel like I would say something I don't necessarily believe. I think I don't know. Can I come back to that one? I'd love to kind of like think about that in the back of my head. That's a great question and like really apt for my work. And I'm like, why haven't I thought of that before? But
we'll move to this question from Drew. She said, With your alphabet poems, how do you not stumble over all the alliteration? Does it take lots of practice of the phrasing?
It does. Yeah, the alphabet poems, more than any other poems, are ones that get read aloud like over and over again, which is how I figured out that P was not necessarily going to happen. I mean, there are lots of ways to do P. There's like, sometimes P makes a T sound, but I'm not going to write a poem about like pterodactyls. I can't just do that forever. Sometimes it makes an F sound, but it's not, so a lot of practice, going really slowly. The pacing is really important because you can't, if you go too slowly, you can miss the previous sound, right? And if you go too quickly, you will 100% like trip over yourself and make a fool of yourself, which is why it can also be nice to like vary, if it's a like a vowel change, like making sure you're incorporating a good range of how the vowels are pronounced, so it doesn't just get kind of stale in your head. But yes, practice is the answer for that one.
Excellent. Lisa said, your work is so lovely and feels lush without straying into decadence. How do you know where the line is between those two, and how do you know when to practice restraint? Or do you think there is a line?
That's another good question. My MO is to, I mean, this is sort of tricky, to make it as dense as possible without it feeling like overkill, without it feeling like, oh, I can see that she like put that word in there so that it would kind of chime off of this word, but she's just showing off. Like there's no reason for that word to be there. So, and some of it is just like practice, and how, just a sec here. I was reading a book recently whose language is like extremely Baroque, and I feel like I had to get like a thesaurus out to make it make sense to myself, and to kind of unweave the metaphors that they were sort of building. And I want my poems to be more intuitive, but also kind of sonically at least like lush and dense. I don't know. I may overdo it. I mean, you don't think I do, which is great. Thank you, whoever asked that question. But it is a fine line. Sometimes if you change the form of a poem, it's a way of getting rid of extra words you find or lines or phrases you find you don't use. Like putting something in prose poem, like it's much more overwhelming. You can be like, oh, I don't need all these words here. That makes it feel better. Or like taking a poem and putting it down into like a more stickic format, so you can see which words are really sticking out. Sometimes I'll like run poems through various forms to see which words are sort of like catching and like, that one is not really necessary. That's a part of my practice that I do quite often.
Right, thank you. Our last question is from Kate. She said, it seems like your poetry has a strong thread of lamentation for the physical earth and environment. Where do you think your fascination with caring for the earth stemmed from?
Caring for the earth. Caring for the earth, I think, is like a very generous way of looking at that versus just like really liking the earth, right? I would like to think that the poems move from like appreciation into like a more active care. I hope that sort of happens. I really like stuff, despite how like grim and pessimistic the poems are. I have like a very intense like joie de vivre and like zest for life, and a very high. I'm very attuned to loss. I think because of that, because I feel so attached to the world. Like I have like these tendrils out into like every part of the world. Anything that gets wrenched away from me is like a deeply traumatic loss. So, and like this is what happens. You get more and more attached to the world, and then you're opening yourself up to like untold like more pain because of that, right? Like if you feel the good things really strongly, you also feel the retraction of them very strongly. So I have a lot of feelings is maybe the answer there.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. Again, it's been wonderful. I wish you could see their faces and hear their praises, all those in attendance. And thank you for joining us for the reading series this week. Don't forget to visit the links in the chat window. We put them in there a couple times. Don't forget. And also, please remember, same time next week for a reading by Emily Ruskovich. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.